When you have people that are defending our freedom and they're standing on the ramparts looking out, they don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to give my life for my country today. They believe in our system, they believe in our form of government, and they believe strongly in the United States. When you look at these things in a historical context and you talk to veterans, it's very difficult to get them to talk about their combat experiences. They went through things that most of us don't and went through some horrific sacrifices. We lost 58,000 men in that war. The country at the time was so polarized that we weren't able to really separate the men from the mission. And so they never really felt that they were properly thanked when they came home. It's important that the veterans tell their own story so that kids understand what these sacrifices were like and what these men went through. If we don't do this, future generations are going to forget. They're going to forget what happened. There's just so much going on. There's so many things happening in the world. We need to preserve all of these items, and we need to preserve the stories of these men in their own words, not as the museum interprets it, but what these guys actually went through and how they felt making those sacrifices for the United States. One of the ways that society exists is that we're all building blocks. We have arts, entertainment, music. We fit into that because when men go out in the field, they have to believe in the fabric of the society that they're defending. If they don't, that's how societies fail. So these men, whether they liked it or not, went out into the field and defended our way of life, as their fathers did before them and their fathers before that. So we're just continuing to tell this legacy. You know, one of the things that's important about the Miles Hangar is it's a tremendous teaching tool and allows the vets to come in with their families and talk about the airplane they flew, what action they were in, and how they defended their country. In a way, this lets them and the family heal as well. People don't think about that, but that's really important. Ken Miles has an amazing story. You know, he started out in the Navy in World War II, and then he finished his little brief stint in the Navy and went in the Air Force. Pretty much flew everything they had. I mean, over his career, later in life he was promoted as a general officer. He was made a general, but he loved flying. He loved flying. He had a passion for it. He was heavily involved in our museum, and he'd been honored many times. But specifically after, you know, Ken passed away, we started thinking about naming the hangar after him, and specifically what he did at the Battle at Tonle Chong, where he won the Silver Star. The Special Operations soldiers were mostly Green Berets. They're Special Operations Group soldiers, SOG troops. And what they would do is they would come into the country, and each one of them had a various skill. One might be a medic, one might be a communications officer, one was a weapons officer. They would teach the local troops how to defend themselves and basically be there to provide the backbone of the support, stiffen the village up. August 6, 1967, one of the Green Berets walked out and saw thousands of troops coming into the area, into the village. And he emptied his M16 to wake up the other soldiers, and he got shot. He didn't get killed, but he got shot. And that's kind of the start of this fight. And the stage is set. You have these 8 Special Operations soldiers pretty much fighting off 2 regiments of North Vietnamese Army troops. So anywhere from about 2,000 to 4,000 men. It depends on what account you read, how many men there were there. But these were uniformed North Vietnamese Army soldiers. These were not Viet Cong. And this was highly unusual to have North Vietnamese soldiers that far south. The ground commander with the Special Operations soldiers probably would be assessing what's going on. And things were so bad that he called the forward air controller. This is the guy who kind of coordinates all the various air assets that are around that area when somebody needs something. he calls this what they call a FAC, forward air controller, and he basically says, look, I need everything you've got on my position. Literally drop it right on top of me. And so he started looking around for various assets, and he calls Ken and says to Ken, hey, I've got this fire base under attack. I need you to go down there. And Ken's response to him is, I can't get in there. It's a box canyon. The visibility is too low. And the airplane behind me here is a F-100. It's a big jet. It flies 600-800 miles an hour. And you got to remember, at that time, they didn't have GPS. They didn't have night vision. They flew off grid coordinates that they'd be looking at in the airplane. And so the FAC comes back and says, look, if you don't get down here, these guys are going to get overrun. And at that point, Ken says, okay, I'll try to get my airplanes in there. So there's a flight of 2 aircraft. There's Ken's airplane and a wingman. So down they go through this cloud cover, and they break the cloud cover at about 800 feet. They can see, but it's so low that Ken can actually see, and these are in his own words, the VC Viet Cong firing into the camp, which is at night, if you can imagine that. That's got to be pretty spectacular. But he can see all this. He starts getting anti-aircraft fire, and they basically, the first thing they do is they decide they have to suppress these guys shooting at him. So they take care of that. They make a couple more runs over the camp. He's literally strafing people off the wire, so to speak. He runs out of his bombs and ammunition. He goes back to his base, gets another airplane, and flies the same mission again. So both times could have pretty much just flown into a mountain at any time. There were 100 airstrikes that night on the camp, but the reason it Ken won the Silver Star was the fact that he flew the mission twice with 2 different airplanes. One of the most important things we do as a Living History Museum is tell the whole story. All of it globally. There's not a better way to honor these men than to tell the complete story. What happened, how it impacted their life, how they believed in serving their country. And those are things that you're not only going to see just in this piece in the Vietnam area, but when somebody comes here, they're going to hear about the POW MIAs and all the lost MIAs in Vietnam, in Korea, the battles in Korea and the police action. They're going to have the presidential aviation experience. George W. Bush, his airplane will be in there, and H.W. Bush's F-102 will be in there. So both of those airplanes, which is a whole unique conversation that kind of transitions us from World War II into the Cold War with those types of airplanes. So there's going to be all kinds of different aircraft from the period, plus there's going to be these human stories about these individuals that were involved in various parts along the way and how they were impacted. And that's when you get down to it, which is probably the best teaching tool, is when you bring it down to an element that people can understand and that impacts their lives. Because you just can't be talking about battles and map coordinates and those types of things. People don't relate to that, but if they can see how this specifically impacted a human being at a given period of time, that's probably the most profound teaching tool that we're going to have in the Major General Ken Miles hangar.